Section 2 of National Geographic Magazine, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. South America. Annual Address by the President, Gardiner G. Hubbard. Part 2. Population of South America. As the countries of South America were all settled at about the same time and by the same race, and have passed through a like history, they can be considered as a whole. The United States and Canada, with a rough, uncongenial climate and sterile soil, were settled by the Anglo-Saxons, the remainder of the western continent by the Latin race, and, excepting Brazil and Guiana, by Spaniards. In North America, the Anglo-Saxon race has dominated, carrying civilization from the Atlantic to the Pacific, expelling and exterminating the aborigines. There has been no mingling of the Anglo-Saxon and Indian races, no backward step, but ever civil, religious, and intellectual progress. The Latin race conquered Central America and South America, a perfect Eden of natural loveliness, 100 years prior to the settlement of the Anglo-Saxon. Yet today they constitute but a thin layer over a scarcely populated country. Their leaders were men of unbounded ambition, rapacious, of great endurance, but cruel and unscrupulous. They sought adventure, expecting it would bring them gold and silver. For that end they plundered, despoiled, and enslaved the Indians. Gold and silver flowed into their hands. Luxury, effeminacy, and weakness followed. The Spaniards in America have scarcely retained the civilization they brought from the Old World. They have intermarried with the Indians, and this mixed race is said to inherit the vices of each of their ancestors without the virtues of either. A sparse population, mostly Spanish and foreigners, inhabit a zone 10 to 20 miles in depth along the coast of South America, from the Bay of Panama to the Caribbean Sea. All the cities and settlements, except a few in the Argentine Republic, are near the coast. Back of the zone, on the Pacific, is a mixed Spanish-Indian population, much larger than the Spanish and foreign population, and on the Atlantic a population which is Spanish-Indian, Spanish-Negro, and Negro-Indian occupies a zone from 20 to 100 miles wide. Beyond the first zone, a few Spanish families and foreigners are found at the gold and silver mines, on the pampas, at the cattle ranches, and on a few haciendas in Peru and Chile. In Brazil, the Portuguese and some Englishmen and Germans raise coffee and sugar, and oversee the diamond and gold fields. On the Amazon there are a few small settlements to collect the India rubber and cacao of that valley. Save these sparse settlements, the interior of South America is inhabited by wild tribes of Indians, uncivilized save for the presence of a few Catholic priests who have given the Indians the cross and the image of the Virgin Mary, which they worship, mingling the Catholic religion with their old idolatries and barbarous rites. The natives are believed to be more idle and less civilized than when the Spaniards discovered America. The Spaniards are the grandees of the country. Too proud to work, they leave all business to the foreigners and all labor to the Indians, retaining in connection with the half-breeds all political power. When the regents appointed by Spain were expelled in the early part of the present century, republics were established, but they were republics only in name. The people were neither educated nor fitted for self-government. Their presidents generally exercised the powers of dictators, and often assumed that title. They have rarely enjoyed a long rule, for their power and position were sought by others. Revolution in these countries has passed from the acute to the chronic stage. A recent traveler in Peru, who wished to inspect its railroad system, was informed that only 26 miles were in running order, the remainder being under the control of the revolutionists, who were then less than 80 miles from the capital. He asked why the rebels did not take Lima, the capital, and was told, because there is no unanimity among them. They are suspicious of each other, and cannot depend upon any one man. Instead of being anxious to serve their country, they are only interested in robbing her. Another traveler in Bolivia, who witnessed some of these revolutions, says they sometimes occurred 3 times in as many weeks, and that it would have been ludicrous had not the results been often violent and tragic. There has been no settled government, no continued peace, no permanent policy in any Spanish country. The hope for the future is that the English, German, and French population will increase and become permanently identified with the country. They will then take an active interest in politics and direct the policy and administration of the government. Commercial and banking business is in the hands of the French, Germans, and English. The Italians carry on a small trade at corner groceries and fruit stores. The French keep the hotels and restaurants. The English and Germans are the shippers, merchants, and bankers. Regular lines of English, French, and German steamers run from Europe to Panama, and thence along the western coast of South America, stopping at ports en route. Some return by Panama, others sail around Cape Horn to Europe by Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro. Other lines run direct from Europe to Brazil, and 24 lines connect Europe and the Argentine Republic, while there are only 4 lines of American steamers trading to South America. Brazil. We have given a general description of South America, but 3 countries, Brazil, the Argentine Republic, and Peru, require further notice. Brazil, because it is the largest country, occupying 3/7 of South America, and the only considerable state that was not settled by the Spaniards. The Argentine Republic, because it is the largest and most populous of the Spanish states, and, with Peru, illustrates the political and financial phases through which the Spanish republics have passed. The valley of the Amazon makes Brazil the most fertile region of the world. The tropical woods are so thick, and the creepers and undergrowth so luxuriant, that animal life is almost entirely confined to the trees above and the waters below. The valley is not unhealthy, and, though under the equator, the climate is tempered by the trade winds and the evaporation from the vast Amazonian waters. Beyond the valley is the Montanha district, where the land is higher and the climate semi-tropical, where there are few creepers, little underbrush, and open forests, and where both animal and vegetable life is less abundant. Southward, beyond the Montanha district, are the evergreen pampas, where no trees grow and where the animal and vegetable life are unlike either that of the valley of the Amazon or that of the Montanha. As in Africa, so here, men who live in the dark forest die in the open. Mr. Stanley selected 30 dwarfs from the tropical forests of Africa to take to England, but as soon as they came into the grasslands, the clear air and bright sun, they languished and died before the coast was reached. Northeast of the Pampas, on the Atlantic coast, south of the Amazon, is a province bounded on the south by a range of high mountains, where rain is abundant. At Maranhão, its seaport, there are 280 inches of rainfall in the year. South of Maranhão, there is much less rain, and instead of 2 seasons, the wet and the dry, which prevail in the valley of the Amazon, there are the 4 seasons of the year, but without extremes of heat and cold. Over the greater part of Brazil grows the coffee tree, the sheet anchor of Brazilian prosperity, since it furnishes 60% of all the coffee grown in the world. The plant is not indigenous to Brazil, but was brought there about 100 years ago from the Old World. Brazil, inhabited by the Portuguese, with an imperial government, has been saved from the anarchy and insolvency of the Spanish republics. Her railroads have been built with economy and have been generally successful. It had a population in 1885 of 11 million, 2/3 of whom were Indians and Negroes, and many of the Negroes were slaves. Slavery existed longer in Brazil than in any other civilized country. The lash was commonly used on the plantation, and work continued from early in the morning until late at night, until 1888, when a law was passed finally emancipating 1,300,000 slaves. It was opposed by the planters, who said freedmen would not work, but would let the coffee and sugar plantations fall to ruin. It was probably this act which caused the overthrow of the empire, for in revenge the planters joined the insurgents in establishing the republic. The Portuguese and Brazilians are more peaceable and orderly than the Spaniards or Spanish Americans. We may therefore reasonably hope that Brazil will not repeat the history of the Spanish republics, which has been one of disintegration, for these republics have separated into 2 or more states. The greatest difficulty in maintaining its immense domain will arise from the enormous distances and the time required to travel between different parts of the country. From Rio de Janeiro to Mato Grosso is 140 days' journey by land, and by water the distance is 3,000 miles. Communication is maintained by steamer through the Argentine Republic up the Rio de la Plata and its branches. Although the country has many long and navigable rivers, yet the means of intercommunication are very poor, for the rivers are little used, and the forests, creepers, and undergrowth are so dense that the country back of the river banks is impenetrable, and even if roads should be opened, the soil is so luxuriant that they would be quickly overgrown and soon become impassable. Lines of steamers have been subsidized by the Brazilian government, and run up the Amazon 2,000 miles to Tabatinga, at the boundary line of Peru, there connecting with lines subsidized by the Peruvian government, which run 1,500 miles farther up the river. These vessels carry supplies to the settlers and bring back India rubber, Brazil nuts, cacao, quinine, and the beautiful woods of the forest. Yet steamers are rarely seen on the Amazon. They have few passengers, and have not opened the country. We are told that the Mississippi carries more vessels in a month, and the Yangtze-Kiang in a day, than the Amazon in a year. The Argentine Republic. The history of South American republics is illustrated in the Argentine Republic. It is a vast pampas or prairie, extending from Brazil to the Andes, and from Bolivia with a southeasterly trend 2,000 miles to southeastern Terra del Fuego. The climate of the northern portion is tropical, of the central part semi-tropical, of the extreme south temperate or cold. The country is generally well watered, excepting in the northwestern part, where the land is dry and alkaline, like the arid regions of North America. The soil is a rich, deep loam, from 4 to 6 feet in depth, excepting in Patagonia and the western pampas, where there is a coarse gravel and detritus from the Andes. Instead of the dense tropical forest of the Amazon Valley, the pampas are covered by a coarse grass 3 or 4 feet high, growing in large tussocks and all the year round of a dark green. The strong grass crowds out all trees and almost all plants, so that scarcely a flower relieves the uniform, everlasting verdure. Instead of the arboreal animals of the Amazon, there is the rhea, or American ostrich, ship of the wilderness, adapted to the pampas, but unable to live in the forests. The gauchos have hunted it for the last 3 centuries, but it is now passing away, and will soon be lost to the pampas, as the buffalo has been to the North American prairie. The pampas are far better adapted to the raising of cattle than our prairies, for the grass is always green and the winters are milder. Cattle, horses, and sheep, imported by the Spaniards and turned on to the pampas, rapidly increased, and now immense herds feed on the plains. The Indians who inhabit the pampas, instead of being confined to one locality and journeying only by canoe, like the Indians on the Amazon, wander over the length and breadth of the pampas, hunting the ostrich and cattle. The cattle are tended by gauchos, as the cowboys are called, half-breeds, as wild as the herds they tend. Constant warfare exists between the Indians and the gauchos, unless they unite to attack the settlers. After one of the Indian raids, the government dug an immense ditch from a river to the Andes and drove the Indians to the further side, and since then there have been fewer raids and fewer Indians. The land was held in large blocks of many thousand acres, worked by overseers and gauchos. The animals were killed by hundreds of thousands for their skins. This state of things is, however, gradually passing away, for during the last 20 years emigrants from the Old World have settled in the country as farmers and planters. The 14 provinces which form the Argentine Republic have never been welded into one nation, and have seldom had a moment's peace. The gauchos have been a continual scourge, and the gaucho generals its rulers and harriers combined. Unfortunately, here, as in other Spanish states, one dictator has succeeded another. 30 presidents or dictators have reigned within 50 years. At one time 5 provinces had each a separate dictator. The neighboring Republic of Uruguay, formerly a part of the Argentine Confederation, had 26 revolutions in the 23 years from 1864 to 1887. For some time Buenos Aires and its dictator ruled the Republic. Then the country provinces rebelled, and civil war ensued. One province was arrayed against another, and all against Buenos Aires. The provinces prevailed, and the gaucho general, Rosas, occupied Buenos Aires. Scarcely was this civil war ended when a war arose with the republics of Uruguay and Paraguay. Money was required to pay the army and the cost of civil and foreign wars. Every dictator had his friends for whom provision must be made. Large debts were created, banks were chartered, $200 million of paper money were issued. There were several different circulating mediums. Each province strove to outdo the others in the issue of a currency which quickly depreciated. Companies for different purposes were organized, and many were subsidized, directly or indirectly. We are told that in one case $1,500,000 was paid for a concession, and that Turkish officials, who have hitherto been the champion artists in bakshish, leave off where Argentine blackmailers begin. the price of a drainage scheme at Buenos Aires would buy a whole cabinet of pashas at Galata. Railroads were built running from Buenos Aires in different directions as each province demanded a railroad, with little regard to its population or business. A road was commenced to cross the Andes and open communication between the Atlantic and Pacific over mountains which had never been crossed by a carriage of any kind. The country was not settled so rapidly as the rulers desired. Inducements were, therefore, offered to immigrants. The passage money from Europe and the expenses of the immigrant to his new home have been paid, and land for settlement sold at low rates. It is estimated that over 1,000,000 foreigners have settled in the country during the last 12 years, and the proportionate increase of population in the same period has been twice as great as that of the United States. Grazing lands have been sold at nominal prices to immigrants, or leased for terms of years in lots of 6,000 acres at a rental of $100 a year. Bonds were issued, not only by the government, but by the provinces, by the municipalities, and by the railroads, and all were readily taken in England and Germany. To enable the immigrants to pay for and to cultivate their land, the owner of real estate, on depositing his title deeds with the hypothecary banks and having a valuation of his real estate, received cedulas or bonds of the bank for 1/2 its appraised value. These cedulas for large amounts were issued and sold in Europe, and thus, as ever, more money was required, more bonds were issued. In 1889, a year of peace, the public debt was increased 120%, and it is now said to be over $1,400 millions, and the principal and interest of 2/3 of this amount is payable in gold at a premium of 200%. In 1890 there was no money to meet the interest, and general prostration ensued. It is difficult to ascertain the debt of the Republic, but if the accounts given in the English publications are correct, the debt is greater in proportion to its population and wealth than that of any other country in the world. The only hope of the Argentine Republic is to wipe out the debt by insolvency and bankruptcy. Peru. A strip of land with 1,200 miles of seacoast, without a natural harbor, and 200 to 300 miles wide, consisting of a plain, mountains, a plateau, and still another range of mountains. This is Peru. In the west, where the rain never falls, are numerous small rivers, today mountain torrents, tomorrow dry, rocky beds. Between the lofty ranges of snow mountains is the highest plateau in the world after Tibet. The southern part of this plateau is dry and desolate. The northern portion is well watered, with beautiful streams running now through deep canyons and then through rich, fertile valleys, steadily descending toward the northeast. The valley growing ever broader, warmer, and more delightful, until the montaña is reached, only a few hundred feet above the Atlantic, where the streams have become rivers, navigable to the ocean. The western slope of the mountains is dry and barren, so that breadstuffs and provisions are imported from Ecuador on the north, or from Lower Chile far to the south. Yet no other country has contributed so much to the world's fertility, for here are the great deposits of guano and nitrates, more valuable than mines of gold and silver. These deposits yielded for over 30 years a net annual revenue of $20 million. The eastern slope, rich and fertile, producing every tree and flower, all fruits and vegetables grown in any part of the world. In the mountains, mines of gold and silver, platinum and cinnabar, copper and tin, lead and iron, coal and petroleum, nitrates and asphalt. A bankrupt nation in the midst of untold wealth. Such is Peru. To bring the minerals down to the ocean, tens of millions of dollars were expended on 13 roads. But though none of them were ever finished, they reached a few of the poorer mines. 7 of these roads were built by the government, the others by private parties. The sales of guano and the production of gold and silver made Peru a proud and wealthy nation. Everything prospered until the war with Chile from 1879 to 1883, ending in the defeat of Peru and the loss of a portion of her territory, including a large part of her guano deposit. She was unable to keep her railroads in operation, much less to extend them, or to pay the interest on her bonds, and thus bankruptcy followed defeat. At last, after 14 years of default and 6 years of negotiation, a contract was concluded with Peru by Mr. M. P. Grace of New York in January 1890 on behalf of the bondholders. The bondholders became concessionaires, and in consideration of the release of the bonded debt due to them by Peru, received valuable concessions of money, of mines, of railroads, of lands, and of guano. These concessions include, among other things, a government subsidy of $400,000 a year, secured from the customs of Callao, the mines of Cerro de Pasco, which have yielded a yearly average of $82 million for over 100 years, the entire railway system, 769 miles in length, of the state, a grant of 5 million acres for the extension of the Lake Titicaca Railroad, a grant of 4,500,000 acres for the extension of the Central or Oroya Railroad to the navigable waters of the Ucayala, one of the main tributaries of the Amazon. The exclusive control of the guano deposit until 2 million tons have been sold, from which they expect to sell at least 80,000 tons a year, which will net $1 million. The concessionaires, on their part, agreed to liquidate the Peruvian debt, to repair the railroads, and construct 974 miles in extension of the existing system at an estimated cost of $16 million, and to assume certain other obligations to a limited amount. This, perhaps the most remarkable settlement ever made between a bankrupt nation and its creditor, is due largely to Mr. Grace, and cannot fail to develop the resources of Peru and restore her days of prosperity. Trade relations with the United States. It appears from the foregoing statement that all the carrying trade to and from South America by water is by foreign steamers, that only 4 of these are American lines, that the railroads are generally owned and operated by Englishmen, that the bankers and merchants are Englishmen or Germans, that many of the mines, cattle ranches, coffee plantations, and other estates are owned by non-resident foreigners, and that the largest consumer of South American products is the United States, although this country sells few of its manufactures and products to South America. The English steamers, in the usual course of trade, load with English dry goods consigned to English houses in South America, where they are sold and the proceeds invested in coffee and other products, which are sent in the same vessels to the United States, there sold, and the money invested in our produce for carriage to England. The English, therefore, obtain the profits on manufacture, on the freight to South America, on the sale of the goods in South America, on the freight from South America to the United States, on the sale of those goods, and finally on the freight of the American breadstuffs carried to Europe. For the successful prosecution of any trade between 2 countries, it is essential that each shall produce what the other wants. Thus we raise breadstuffs, which are not grown on the Caribbean Sea, nor in the valley of the Amazon, nor in Peru or Upper Chile. And we also manufacture goods required in all parts of South America, where they have few factories. There, coffee, wool, India rubber, cacao, and other articles are produced which we require. Here, therefore, are the factors necessary for a prosperous trade. Such a trade we formerly enjoyed with South America. In 1852, 600 United States vessels entered the harbor of Buenos Aires, or more than twice as many as those of all other nations combined. Now, only 2% of the shipping entering that harbor belongs to us. Our war came. Iron steamers took the place of wooden sailing ships. We levied a duty on coffee and rubber. South America levied a duty on our manufactures. Other countries subsidized lines of steamers, while we refused all subsidies, and our trade with South America rapidly fell off, as freights were carried cheaper in foreign than in American ships, and the trade of South America passed from the United States to England, Germany, and France. It is said that we cannot regain this trade because we cannot, without protection, maintain our own manufactures, much less compete with the Europeans in an open market, and therefore that it will be a waste of money to subsidize our vessels. But the larger the market, the cheaper we can manufacture, and we can surely find a large and new market for our breadstuffs. It is worth while to make the experiment at least, to give our vessels the same subsidy and protection that has been given to the European lines, and to our merchants and bankers an opportunity to regain the trade with South America. At first, the odds will be greatly against us, but if we show the same energy and ability in cultivating trade with South America that our fathers exhibited, and that we have shown in other directions, we must ultimately succeed. It is now proposed to tax the products of South America, unless the South American states reciprocate and admit our breadstuffs and manufactures free. If this scheme can be carried out, a large and prosperous commerce will be established between North America and South America, and American houses will be started in the large cities to dispose of our manufactures and ship the products to South America. By this interchange, our manufacturers and farmers will find a market for their goods and products, our mercantile navy freight for its vessels, and our bankers and merchants a profitable business in the large cities of South America. Railroads. We have already referred to the several railroads which start from the little ports on the Pacific coast and run up the valleys toward the Andes. 3 of these, among the most remarkable roads in the world, ascend to a greater elevation than any others, and to a height which in Europe or the United States would be above the snow level. They were intended to reach the gold and silver mines between the Andes and Cordilleras. The first, called the Oroya or Central Railroad, 111 miles in length, starts from Callao on the Pacific and crosses the Andes at an elevation of nearly 15,000 feet to the plateau between the Andes and the Cordilleras. It is expected that this road will be extended to the navigable waters of the Amazon. 300 miles southward, the second road runs from Molendo, Peru, by Arequipa to Puno on Lake Titicaca, and thence northward on the plateau 407 miles to San Rosas on the route to Cusco. The road from Molendo to Arequipa runs through a country so destitute of water that the only supply for the engines and stations is by an iron pipe 8 inches in diameter and 50 miles long, running from an elevation of 7,000 feet to the sea-coast. 700 or 800 miles south of Molendo, a line runs from Valparaíso in Chile to Buenos Aires, 870 miles. It crosses the Andes through a tunnel 2 miles long at an elevation of 10,568 feet above the sea. After leaving the mountains, it runs over the Pampas 200 miles, without a curve or a grade over 3 feet above or below the plain, and will soon be completed from ocean to ocean. From Rio de Janeiro, several roads have been constructed over the mountains west of that city to different parts of Brazil. One of these runs westwardly toward Bolivia. Bolivia has recently granted concessions for the construction of a road from La Paz to connect on the west with the Peruvian roads at Lake Titicaca, and on the east with the Brazilian lines on the Pacific. And thus, ultimately, a road will run from Molendo on the Atlantic Ocean by Lake Titicaca and La Paz to Rio de Janeiro. There are now from 6,000 to 7,000 miles of road in operation in the Argentine Republic, 7,000 to 6,000 in Brazil, and 3,000 to 4,000 miles in the other states, making a total of almost 15,000 miles of railroad in operation. A proposition is now before the public for the construction of the Pan-American Railroad from the Caribbean Sea southward to the Argentine Republic, to connect with the Peruvian, with the Brazilian, and ultimately with the Argentine roads. The route that seems to be most feasible starts at Cartagena, where there is a splendid bay and harbor, within 3 days' sail from Galveston and 6 days from New York. It follows the valley of the Madalena River 800 miles to Dividal, 1,700 feet above the sea. Here, near the headwaters of the Madalena, the route crosses the eastern Cordilleras at an elevation of about 6,500 feet to the headwaters of the Caqueta or Yapura, a branch of the Amazon, and thence runs down that river 375 miles to the mouth of the Angaros, only 550 feet above tide water. From the Caqueta River, the route passes through Ecuador to Iquitos, Peru, crossing 14 tributaries of the Amazon. From Iquitos, the route ascends the Amazon and the Ucayali, one of its southern tributaries, 500 miles to Napal, then continues across the Montanha and the numerous valleys of the Amazon about 600 miles to Santa Cruz in Bolivia, or 2,400 miles from Cartagena, while a branch will run up the Apurimac to Cusco. This road would run for 2,000 miles along the foothills of the Cordilleras, and in these mountains is probably the richest mining region in the world. Here gold, silver, copper, lead, and coal mines are found. The gold and silver mines do not seem to have been thoroughly explored, although untold millions of the precious metals have been extracted from them. These mines are generally in cold and treeless regions, where coal, labor, and food are difficult to obtain, where freights are high and machinery of all kinds most expensive. This road would greatly facilitate the opening and working of these mines, and not only make them profitable, but develop a large and lucrative traffic. Much of Bolivia is above the navigable waters of the Amazon, and many of its provinces are now landlocked and almost isolated from communication with the outer world. The proposed road would cross many branches of the Amazon, and thus connect with 50,000 miles of navigable waters, at least 9,000 of which are above Iquitos, and it is claimed that the business from 20,000 miles of navigable waters would find by this route a nearer outlet to Europe and America than by Pará. There is every variety of climate on the route. The valley of the Madalena is sultry. Every afternoon the water grows tepid, and the stones burning hot in the sun's rays. In crossing the Cordilleras, the cool breezes of the mountains are met. The road then descends into the valley of the Amazon through a rich and not unhealthy region, though it has the damp, hot climate of a tropical country, and thence passes through the Montanha district, which is generally high, healthy, and fertile. This country, under a wise government, is capable of sustaining an immense population and giving abundant support to such a railroad. But it is now unexplored, excepting the valleys of the navigable rivers, and is uninhabited, save by wild and savage Indians, though these are not numerous. The route up the Madalena may be expensive by reason of the climate, but not otherwise. The road in the mountain district will necessarily be costly, and also in the Sierras, because it must cross the numerous ranges of the Amazon and the precipitous mountains between the valleys, and from the difficulty of obtaining labor and material for construction. Mr. Orton, who crossed from one branch of the Napo to another, says, "We crossed the stream and the intervening ridges, and their name is Legion. Sometimes we were climbing up an almost vertical ascent, then descending into a deep, dark ravine to find a furious river, while on the lowlands the path seemed lost in the dense bamboos, until the Indians opened a passage with their machetes, and we crept under the low arcade of foliage." Even if the railroad were built, almost all the produce of the Amazon and Montanha country could be carried more cheaply by water to Pará than by rail to Cartagena, while goods from England and America would be carried cheaper by steamer to the Isthmus of Panama, and thence to all ports on the Pacific Ocean, than by steamer to Cartagena and up the Madalena across the Andes to the valley of the Amazon, and then a second time across the Andes to the Pacific Ocean. The greater part of the business to and from the mines would be by the railroad. At present, as there could not be sufficient business to pay the operating expenses of such a road, it must rely on government subsidies to build and operate it. Those who have given the most consideration to the subject say that the road need not be an expensive one to operate, and in the important element of time it would have a great advantage over the route via Pará. As a means of promoting the settlement of the country and developing commerce, which cannot exist without population, the railroad would seem to be a necessity, for navigation has neither opened the country nor brought in emigrants, and we may fairly assume that it will not suffice in the future. Conclusion. In conclusion, I will quote from two writers on tropical America. Buckle says, "Amidst the pomp and splendor of nature, no place is left for man. He is reduced to insignificance by the majesty with which he is surrounded. The forces that oppose are so formidable that he has never been able to make head against them. The energies of nature have hampered his spirit. Nowhere else is the contrast so painful between the grandeur of the external world and the littleness of the internal, and the mind, cowed by this unequal struggle, has been unable to advance. Here, where physical resources are the most powerful, where vegetation and animals are most abundant, where the soil is watered by the noblest rivers, and the coast studded by the finest harbors, the profusion of nature has hindered social progress and opposed that accumulation of wealth without which progress is impossible." Mr. Bates, the naturalist, after a residence of many years on the Amazon, closes his book as follows: "The superiority of the bleak north to tropical regions is only in its social aspects, for I hold to the opinion that although humanity can reach an advanced state of culture only by battling with the inclemency of nature in high latitudes, it is under the equator alone that the perfect race of the future will attain to complete fruition of man's beautiful heritage, the earth. Washington, January 1891. End of section 2.